Dear students, as we started our object-oriented programming classes, in the classes I will be discussing about different concepts of object-oriented programming with programming, with practical, and the last lecture I was talking about objects and classes. Hope you understood the concept of objects and classes, and I will be continuing keeping the object and class as foundation. And in the last lecture I told about that I will be discussing about the object oriented programming, why actually it is required, and what is the advantage of using object oriented programming in function oriented programming. As we saw in case of C is a function oriented programming language. What does it mean? The function oriented programming language, it is a method of writing program, developing program, where we write collection of code, what we call function, the group of statements together, and we give a name to that, and we call it function, and that function performs a particular task. Suppose I'm giving one example where we can see how function works. And as example, I'm taking example of adding two numbers. So if I want to add two numbers or add two integers particularly, in that case I will be creating one function called add. I will give a name to group of statement which will add to integer. So in that case, in that group of statement, I will be taking input. I will creating the variable. I will be taking inputs to those variables, and I will be adding up those the values of the variable, and I will keep that value in one another variable, and I will display the result. So though this total task will be defined in this 4 5 statements, and I will be grouping those statements together, and I will give one name. That block is called function. And in C you will find the total entire program is actually developed like that. In that case we have one function called main function, which is actually declared in the compiler, and compiler starts executing the program from main, and the first statement in the main will be the execution point, where the compiler will start executing the program. In that case, the flow will go from one function to another. If I have main function in one program, in one C program, and I can write few instructions in main, and then that main function can call another function, which right now I have discussed that I will create another function called add function. That function is called user defined function. So I will be grouping together some instructions, few instructions in add function, and I will call that add function from main. So in that case we call it a function oriented problem solving mechanism, where every task will be grouped, will be created in terms of functions. And in that function oriented programming language, we don't focus on data or values, we rather focus on functions or tasks. So we can take example of a banking system. In banking system, the tasks are creating account, tasks are depositing money, tasks are withdrawing money, and tasks are updating balance. Then in that way we see the banking system can be divided in terms of tasks. In function oriented programming language, if we want to simulate the banking applications in computer, we'll be writing a program where we'll be creating functions called withdraw function, deposit function, create account function, update balance function, delete account function, like that. So in that case we don't focus on data, we focus on function, and that concept is called function oriented programming language. With the diagram I will be showing you that how the function oriented programming language looks like. So from function to function, actually we with the flow of the execution, or the flow of the compiler, will go from function to function. In our C program, if you can remember any program, any small program, you'll find main is the function, which is a collection of many instructions, From there we go to another function called add, subtract, or any other function, and we go to that function, and from that add function we can go to display function if we create another function. From display function we can come to again add, and we'll come to main, and this way the execution will be completed. And in function, the concept function, we have two kinds of function. One is called user defined function, which we create, means we group instructions together, and there is other type of function which is called library functions. In case of library functions, the task which is to be done, it is already defined in the function, and it is stored in the library, and we in our program will be just calling that function with appropriate argument, with appropriate parameters, with appropriate name. That function we can use. Like in case of C program, we saw that we used printf function, used scanf function. Those printf and scanf functions are not user defined function. We have not created those function in our program, we did not define those function, but we use those function. So from where the definition of those function came? The definition of the function came from the library. And you have to understand the concept that in computer programming everything has to be defined. Nothing is implicit here, everything is explicitly defined. Maybe something is defined in my own program, which I am defining as a programmer, we call it user defined, and something, definition are there in the library. The developer or the creator of the compiler, they created those definitions and they kept in the library. In case of printf and scanf, the definition of those things are there in the library. This is called user defined function, library functions. So there are many other examples. You can find out the power, you can find out the sine, cos, you can find out the square root. You can do many things with the help of library functions. So again, I'm coming back to my previous point, that is function oriented model of developing or writing any program or solving any problem. So in case of function oriented programming model, we divide the problem or the solution in terms of tasks, in terms of like doing something, or writing some function, writing some code, group of statements of which will perform that task, that particular operation. We suppose I can give another example, like in case of function oriented programming language. Suppose I want to calculate the marks of average marks of a class of any particular subject. So in that case I will create a function, user defined function called calculate average. So in that I will be defining the task, I will be defining the from main or from some other function, I can call that, and that will be definitely called, and my task, my purpose will be over. But there are many limitations in function oriented programming language. As I said, the function oriented programming language doesn't bother about the security of data or the protection of data. So when I talk about the security of data or protection of data, if the data is global, then any function can overwrite that data, any function can damage the data, because data is not protected in particular locally with the functions or with the particular function. Suppose there is a in banking system example, as I mentioned the banking system, in banking system. So if there is a variable called balance, and the balance need to be manipulated by deposit function, withdraw function, display the balance or update the balance. In many cases the balance is being manipulated or being updated by the different functions. So in that case you cannot keep the balance variable in any particular function, otherwise that will become local to that function and no other function can see that. So we need to create a variable balance as global. So in that global in that case the global variable the data we want to manipulate in function-oriented programming language. Many, the set of data we keep global. There are local variables in case of function-oriented programming language. In many other functions we keep local variables, local values to just perform our task. But we have set of data which are global. So in that case, that global data is not protected. So we'll come to the security of data when we'll discuss about the protection of data in object-oriented programming model. We have a concept called data hiding in case of object-oriented programming language. So what I was discussing, the function-oriented model. So there are other disadvantages. Suppose in case of function-oriented programming language, the major thing is that the real-world problem is actually a collection or the combination of real-world entities, what we refer to as object. Actually, what is object? Object is everything. Object is everything which can be defined, which can be described, which are visible, which are invisible, which are as ideas only. So any materialistic thing, living, non-living. So this object is, the term object is taken from the real world. It is not actually a computer science term. So the real world problem we actually want to solve in computer. So here the real world problem is actually a collection of objects and communication between those objects. Means there are relationship between those objects. So in that case, there is no way to represent, to model those objects in a function oriented programming language, because in function oriented programming language we do not focus on data, and we cannot give a structure like the by default structure where the objects can be represented or mapped there. So this is the another bigger problem, where real world problem cannot be mapped, cannot be represented in function oriented programming language. So when I will discuss the other facts or other advantages, features of object oriented programming language, and when we'll go further, you will understand that the difference between object oriented programming language and function oriented programming language. So the beginning, it is enough that you have a little bit understanding of function oriented programming language and object oriented programming language.